The area of family purity that we'll be covering is ketamim, stains. It's a complex area, so you have to pay close attention. But I'm just letting you know in advance, if any time a question arises where you have any doubts or it is not clear to you, you should consult a rabbi, as with any other halakha or question in Taharat HaMishpacha. You don't want to take a chance, a safek, it could be a safek d'oraita, it could be a safek d'Rabbanan, it could be something which you can be lenient with, it could be something very, very strict that you don't want to take a chance. So the area of ketamim is an important area that one needs to know, both men and women, how to deal with them if they ever arise. In the past weeks, before Pesach, we've begun the series of Taharat HaMishpacha, and we've discussed so far the main process that mostly a woman has to be aware of, and that is when she gets her period, the mahzor, what she needs to do about it, how she handles herself during that time, how she checks herself, the Hefsek Tahara, the Shiva Nikiyim, the 7 clean days. Those are very important days. That's an important part of Taharat HaMishpacha. It mostly affects the woman. We spoke a little bit about Yoledet, how things are slightly different for a woman who gives birth, how it affects a pregnant woman, a nursing woman. We also spoke about the differences for a Kala, the slight differences that apply to her. And we've also covered an important area that applies to men too, that they need to be very intimately aware of, and that is the harchakot, the various, I guess we can call them distances, or things that men and women do not do during that 11 or 12-day period when the husband and wife cannot be together. There are many things that are called vidarim or siyagim, fences, that may or may not be prohibited by the Torah. Nevertheless, because they lead, or they can bring about close contact which could lead to the isur karet of nidah, the rabbis were very strict as to what can be done and what cannot be done between husband and wife during that time. We've covered these halachot, and now we are proceeding with ketamim, and in 2 weeks from now we'll cover one of the most complex areas that apply mostly to women, but men have to be aware of it too, and that is the vesatot, how to establish the cycle, how to figure out when one needs to be apart, and how to calculate or to estimate when that time will come again. It's a very important part of Taharat HaMishpacha, but it's complex, depending if it's irregular or irregular. After that, things get a little bit easier. We'll talk about Hilchot Yihud, about when man and woman be together by themselves, when not, and some of the other halachot or customs that apply to Taharat HaMishpacha as well. For example, Hilchot Sinut, how a husband and wife together, and on what days during the year it is not advisable, even though she's clean. So we'll speak about those additional halachot towards the end. Let me begin with the pasuk in Parshat Metzorah. V'isha ki tiyeh zavad dam, yeh zovach b'bsarach, shevat panim tiyeh b'nidatach, v'chol hanogea ba yitma ad ha'aretz. It is learned from this pasuk that the Torah explicitly points to dam, that a woman becomes a nidah, discussed in the very big introduction, when she actually sees blood, and especially after she had a sensation, a hargasha. There are various types of hargashot that even if she does not discover blood right away, the fact that she had it may make her unclean. Those hargashot were, amongst others, she felt a certain trembling, something flowing in her, according to some opinions, or a certain other sensation that she can associate a flow of blood, especially if she discovers blood right after it. Even if it's a small speck, that would render her Tameah Midoraita, according to the Torah. That is the Dam Nidah. So the Chachamim learned from this pasuk that what is explicitly prohibited and what makes a woman a nidah, dam, especially if with a hargasha, the regular period. However, it does not say anything about tanim, anything about stain. So what happens if a woman all of a sudden during the middle of the month discovers a stain? So there are many details, and that's what we've been discussing tonight. It all depends on all these 9 categories that you see. It's pretty much divided between 8 or 9 categories on what renders a ketem tamed, or a thing that one needs to be concerned with, or something that she doesn't have to be. It all depends on how it fits these categories. Before we begin, let me just tell you that the most important issue, if I can say that, is 3, and that is the color, the place where it is found, and the size. These are the 3 things that you always have to have in mind in your ketem. Okay, how big is it? What's the color? And where was it? But I'm simplifying it. In reality, it's a lot more complex. So let's begin with the most important decision that one needs to make once you find a ketem. And that is, was there a sensation before it? Was there a hargasha? Perhaps the beginning of a new period, perhaps there's real blood, there's dam nidah, and it's not a ketem. So once we know for sure there was no hargasha, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there's a stain somewhere, that's called a ketem. I didn't say if it's a ketem tameh or tahor, if it's clean or unclean, but it's called a ketem as opposed to real dam nidah. So once we've made that determination that it's not blood, that there was no sensation, that it's a real ketem, our next Our next question is, well, how did we discover it? Was it by doing a check? Women check themselves, me too, at certain times of the month check themselves internally. If it was discovered after an internal check of herself, that it's also not that's real blood. I mean, you can call it a stain, but it makes no difference anymore how big it is. The only difference that it would make is the color. The colors, green colors, yellow colors are concerned. But we're no longer concerned with the size anymore. If it's an internal examination for whatever reason, the woman examines herself, she checks herself out inside, and she finds even a speck of blood on that piece of cloth that she checks herself with, it's not under the category of tamim. That's real blood. And by the way, anytime a woman becomes teme'ah, the result of a real stain, that's the result of blood, 5 and 7 days apply. In other words, the 4 or 5, depending which custom you follow, of unclean days plus the 17 days that a woman has to keep. That is true whether it was a regular period, regular blood, or it was a stain that qualifies as a... So the first two, and maybe even I put this one under number, the Dikrat Chutz. If it's real blood with a sensation, for example, or if it's something that she discovers with an internal exam, that does not qualify as a stain, and it's automatically tameh, as long as it's an unclean color, and regardless of the size. However, there's a question as to what happens if she cleans herself on the outside, not inside. Then it becomes a little bit tricky. Depends why she's cleaning. If it's, if you're just cleaning yourself, one is in the restroom itself, and all of a sudden on a paper, on a toilet, there is some blood, that is not as she actually cleaned her. She wanted to, check herself, or she wanted to clean herself on the surface there. She may have found some blood. That is more of a problem. Some say that you have to treat that as a keten, as a regular keten. We'll talk about the conditions. And some say no. It's almost like an internal check. Some are more lenient, some are stricter. If it's mamash on the surface, if the woman knows for sure that she did not enter inside, if it was just on the surface, then she treat it as a keten. When I say treat it as a keten, it means that in order for that keten, for the stain to qualify as an unclean stain, it has to meet various criteria. But it's called a keten as opposed to be considered real blood and being teme'ah mideoraita. But if she was just cleaning herself after a regular, cleaning after being in the restroom, that is not. There's blood in the urine with conflict. So if anytime something like that happens, you should see a doctor first. Because the doctor can determine or can make it easier for you to determine where it's from or why it's. But that's something to look into. But if it's just found on a tissue or piece of paper after the restroom, it's not such a... As long as you know you didn't go inside. Okay, now we begin with the criteria. One of the first important criteria determining how we should deal with the stain, whether it was a beged baduk or not, or checked garment. It can happen that a woman put on something that was dirty from last month, that was never cleaned well, it's still there. She might say, oh no, there's a stain. And the stain is big enough and it's the right color and so forth. Yes, but is it a beged baduk? Did you, before put on this dress, skirt, did you check it? Maybe it was unclean from before. Since I'm already talking about checked garments, I might as well mention another point. Some women lend their clothes to others. I hope the men here are not bored. It's important for everybody to know. Sometimes the wife forgets. Each one needs to remind each other. Sometimes women lend their clothes to others. Before they do so, they should check it. It shouldn't be a problem for the next woman. And when you get it back, you check it again. You shouldn't have the problem. Yeah, I'll talk about that. Why not? What you're saying? A dress or a skirt? No, you don't understand. We're talking about right now the criteria of determining if something is a stain or not. Now, let's say you find a stain on your dress, on a skirt, right? This is one of the criteria. I'm going to tell you why a dress is in the world later on. A dress is less of a problem because a dress usually is not close to the body. That's probably what, right? Some people are aware of Hashem, of what's going on. Very true, but it's possible. There are some garments that even though it appears like it made what's the blood doing there? It couldn't have come from that spot. It must have been from somewhere else. After all, what are we concerned with over here? Only blood that comes from the place where it's tameh. If it's from, as we will see later, if a woman was cleaning the fish or the chicken, that's a possibility to do. That's how the blood splattered on her dress, right? However, when we see blood, we need to determine, criteria number one is, was that beged? First of all, was it checked? Perhaps there was there blood from before, regardless of the source, but it's there from before. Since you've raised the question about the dress, I'll tell you now. Let's say she wears a dress, but she does exercise. She jumped around, right? It could happen that it got on the dress as a result of exercise. But you are 100% right. No, you're 100% right. On the dress, as long as it's on the outside surface and not on the inside surface, then most likely it's not a problem. And that will come under the criteria makom, right down here, the place. Okay? So I'm going step by step, one by one. Number one, perhaps, should be the criteria to check is, well, maybe this was there before. If this was not checked, if it was just sitting in the closet and you just put it on, you didn't check it was clean, and then all of a sudden you take it off and there's a stain, that's not called a beged baduk. That's called a beged sheino baduk, an unclean garment. A garment that has not been checked. It could be that the stain was there from before, maybe from last month, maybe because the kids got there. And you know, in places where they clean their clothes and they hang them up to dry outside on lines, it could be even from birds and from dirt. Right? Yeah, it could be. There's all sorts of possibilities. So that is why we need to determine if a beged is baduk or not, because if it's not baduk, you can immediately say that this keten is clean, perhaps. You don't have to worry about it. There's a chance that this is an old stain, this is a stain from somewhere else, from another time. So we need to determine, was this garment checked before you put it on? If it was just after the laundry, clean, put away in a place which it's supposed to be outside, in your drawer, in your dresser, then that's called a beged baduk. Then this could be a keten, as long as it meets the other criteria, size, color, etc. But if you've made the determination, well, I don't know, maybe this was never taken to the laundry, even though it's a thing, or maybe some kids, maybe it's ketchup. You have to really take a close look. And that is why this is important to determine, did I check this before I put it on or not? It's clean. Was it in a place where it could have easily gotten dirty? Then it would not be a keten. If you could attribute that, and that's what I wrote over then, attributable. There are times that we can attribute it to something else, and guess what? This keten is no longer a problem. Why are we so lenient to stains? Because stains, as I said earlier, is midrabanan, not midoraita. We need the hargasha, the dam. If the hargasha, the sensation is not there, it's not or there's a good chance that it could be. However, of course, one checks herself inside, and that's where I call the stain. Or, see later, the stain was on the body as opposed to the garment, what part of it. That could be it too. But if we have doubts, we follow these steps, perhaps we may be able to attribute it to something other than the dam tameh, and she might be clean. And this is important to do because a woman does not want to separate herself from her husband unnecessarily. Okay, there's a stain, no more. You have to wait, 12 days. That's terrible. You can break up a whole relationship like this just by being too strict too many times for no good reason. Now, obviously, it's good reason, then you have to be careful. So you have to analyze the situation carefully. If you have a question, you ask the rabbi. So beged baduk was the first, perhaps, important criteria to check is perhaps this was unclean and I never cleaned it well. And if you do a laundry and there was a stain before, you might be able to tell if the stain is an old stain or not. You tell. So by closer examination, you might be it's an old one or. All right. The next criteria is the godel haketen, the size. That's a very important criteria. That's not always the case. Remember I said before, if you check yourself inside, it makes no difference how big it is. But a regular stain that is found in the linen, the dress, the shirt, okay, this is important. How big is it? If the keten, the stain, is slightly bigger than a gris, or that would be in today's terms approximately a little bit bigger than a penny, the diameter of which would be approximately 3/4 of an inch. You see, I think I wrote it in millimeters also. 19 millimeters, approximately. Then that would be keten that may qualify to keten tameh. But we need to know the size. If we're dealing with small stains, we're not concerned. What's the issue of the size? The rabbis, when they were lenient to tameh, they took in consideration that there are many times that a woman had a stain as a direct result of the blood of a louse, of lice, of a bug that squashed itself there, or somehow got there. And the size, depending on the average bug, depending on the average size, but usually, the rabbis figured this is the size of the stain that it will leave on the garment. About a penny. Now, it doesn't have to be round, it can be long too. It can be irregular in shape, but you have to figure if approximately it appears to be the size of a penny, if you were to round it, if it's just a little bit over the size of a penny, then it could be possibly a keten tameh, an unclean stain. If it's underneath, if it's not this size, smaller, then we say perhaps it was from a bug. It wasn't from her. We can attribute it to that. We can attribute that perhaps it was from a bug and not from her. So that is an important consideration. How big is it? Surat keten is the next one. The shape of the keten. What happens if you find a stain that's exactly round? What would you think? Perfectly round. Or perfectly elongated like a ruler. Usually when one has blood, it's not a perfect, nice shape, right? So what would you say? Oh, this can't be from that place, right? Well, you never know. It all depends where you find it. So this has to be determined, this has to be established as well, the shape. If it's round, if it's long, if it's irregular, because we will see soon that it makes a difference where you found it. It's on the feet, close to that area, or whether it's on a garment. If it's on a garment, especially on the outer surface of the garment, it's a very strange, not a strange shape, but a shape that could not have come from, then you have no problem. Just by the shape itself, that will tell you that this is not from there, it's okay. So that sometimes could help too, but not always. If it's, for example, on the legs, certain parts of the legs, then we're not going to be so much. It happens by coincidence, that's perfectly round. But that's something to consider. All right, color of the stain. Which colors are unclean? We discussed that in the very beginning, that there are various colors that are tameh, and there are various that are never tameh. The ones that are always tameh or that can be a problem are the ones that fall into the various shades of red. So here you're seeing something big, you're seeing something in the right area, you have to make sure it's the right color too. If it's red or any shade of red, including pink, that could be an issue. As long as the size is right, as long as you found it on the right spots, right? As long as you can't attribute it to something else, right? Everything else is important too, but the color needs to be established. If the color is any of the shades of red, you may have a question. It's not, if it's a green, yellow, or blue, or anything other than red, it's not a problem. What about black? Black is also a problem. Black, similar to red, and even if you see mixture of it, it would be a problem. So red and black are the most problematic colors, and brown you should consult with the brown. Anytime, if it's a brownish color, it could be leaning towards red, and then it could be more like red. It could be not. So somebody who's an expert, who has a lot of experience in colors, would be able to make it into brown. I'm going to get that. Right. I'm going to speak about color garments. Actually, that's one of them. So what do we have so far? We've determined that the beged is baduk. Imagine the beged is baduk. It's clean. It was clean to me before I wore it the last time. It's bigger than a penny. Right now, we're not so much concerned with the shade, regardless of the shade. It's red. Is it already unclean? Does the woman become tameh just by that? No, not necessarily, but if she's getting close, we still have some more things to go through. It all depends where she found it. I'm going to skip number 7 and go to number 8 for easier to. Number 8 is that if she finds the ketan, not on herself, not on her garment, not on her body, but she finds it al davar sheno mekabel tum'ah, on something which does not accept tum'ah. During the days of the Bet HaMikdash, the issue of tum'ah v'tahara, cleanliness and purity, was very important. Whether you were allowed to enter the Mikdash, whether you were allowed to touch certain foods. Today we don't have this issue. In other words, a woman, even though she has the tum'ah, we're not so much concerned about that tum'ah itself, right? It's the being with the husband that in other words, the husband, if he touches her clothing, nothing will happen. I mean, he doesn't have to be concerned with the tum'ah per se. But nevertheless, just like back then, when the issues of tum'ah v'tahara applied, they did not apply to certain objects. There were always certain objects, she'enam mekablim tum'ah, they do not accept tum'ah. Tum'ah does not stick to it. The same way the rabbis say, a woman who sees blood, and that blood is found on something which is not mekabel tum'ah, doesn't accept tum'ah, she doesn't have to be concerned about it. What would be today something which is not mekabel tum'ah? She finds it on the floor. She was sitting on the floor, she got up, it's blood. A stain. The floor, the karka, eno mekabel tum'ah. She doesn't have to worry about it. She sees it on the toilet seat. Because it's attached to the ground, it's not something which is movable like a chair or a table. Anything which is attached to the ground is not mekabel tum'ah. She doesn't have to be concerned about it. And that's why I mentioned before toilet paper or tissue paper. According to most of these items, paper, not every paper, but depends, and not every material either. But for the most part, tissue paper, toilet paper is, according to most of things, davar sheno mekabel tum'ah. She sees it on that, she doesn't have to worry about it. Regardless of the size, regardless of the color, it's something, it was found on the varshen, or if it would be a cloth with very small, there's certain sizes of cloths that are mekabel tum'ah. The cloth is a very small cloth, then it's not mekabel tum'ah. So that is also an issue. And whenever there's a question, or a safek doubt, the rabbi will go through this. Where did you find it? Let me see it. Sometimes it has to be seen to determine the size, the color, and so forth. So this would also not be an issue of concern to be found in a place sheno mekabel tum'ah. Let's go to number 7. That's makom haketem. Makom haketem is very important because there's so many possibilities finding the stain. Other than a place which is not mekabel tum'ah. It could be the sleeve, it could be the hand, it could be the heel, the foot, the leg, right? The back. Let me make it easy for you. If it's a robe, that you wear to sleep, and it's always moving around. When one sleeps, it's moving around. He's not in one position. The robe, regardless of where the spot is found, the ketan on the robe, will usually be an issue of concern. Again, we still have to consider size, color, etc. The fact that it's on a robe, not on a dress, not on a skirt, that the woman sleeps with it, she moves around, then even though it's found on a spot, well, how did it get there? Well, guess what? You sleep, you move around. It could have traveled there. So with the robe, it's a lot more serious, it's stricter than with just a dress or with sheets, the bed linen. That's also a problem. Where do you think it came from? Very possible, not for sure, but very possible, it came from the place where the blood comes from. Still has to be the right color, still has to be the right size, etc. Now, if a woman wears very tight undergarment, it's not possible for that blood to have seeped through and gone to the bed linen, to the sheets. Then she doesn't have to be. Obviously, it got there from something else. Maybe somebody was bleeding and happened to fold the linen. So there are various determinations that need to be made until one, decides whether this is. So the makom haketan is important. The heels for certain parts of the leg and the foot, if it's not underneath the foot, it's very possible that it came from the place where it's tameh. What's the difference between if one finds blood on the body or on a garment? It's basically as follows. Remember we spoke about the size? The size has to be a little bit bigger than a penny. Well, what happens if a woman sees a lot of small prick points of blood, of red stains, several of them? Neither of them is the size of the grease or over a penny. Each one is small. The halakha is that if it's on the beged, they don't add up together. Each one has to be the size of a grease or so in order for it to be nailed. If they're very small and they're not connected, if they're connected, it's no big deal. They're all considered one, but they're small. We say that each one is okay. The little dots don't add up to the shiur to make tameh. It has to be one the size that would make it tameh. However, if it's on the body, like on the hands move around all the time. So it doesn't really make a difference if it's on the top of the hand or the bottom of it. Right? The hands move around more than anything else. Then even if it's not connected, they would add up. Also, if it's on the body, I'll mention it now because I don't want to forget about it. If it's on the body, especially on parts of the body where you can easily assume it came from there, for example, beneath the stomach, right? It's not on your chest, on your shoulder. If it's on the chest or shoulder, probably it came from somewhere else. If it's beneath the stomach area, then the chances are more likely that it's from there. Then we don't say, well, maybe it's a stain that came from ketchup. Maybe from somebody that was walking around and touched her. We don't easily say that. The only exception to that rule is a makabagu, a wound. If a woman had some sort of petza, some sort of wound, injury, even though it's already scabby, and you might think if it already has a scab, no blood can come from it. But as you all know, probably you've had it happen to you once or more. Even if there's a scab, the scab rubs away, blood can come out again. So if a woman has a makah somewhere, especially if she knows she has a injury over there, even if it's inside, it could very possibly be that the blood is from that. So all of this has to be determined. She has a makah, and that makah is not on the shoulder, but it's in a place where we can directly attribute the blood from being from there. Then even if it's on her body, that's okay. That would be like one of the only exceptions, one of the things that you can attribute to exempt the stain from becoming. So basically, as far as makom haketan, as far as the place of the ketan, the main determination has to be made as follows. If it's from a place which is almost impossible that the blood got there from the source, from where it's tameh, then it's clean. It probably came from somewhere else. But if it's beneath the stomach area, the legs, the hands, that area, the heels, then there's a good chance it came from there. Of course, then you have to look at the color, you have to look at the size and everything else. You can't just say, it's from somewhere else. If somebody has a petza on the shoulder, then that does not mean that the blood came from there all the way to the bottom, right? She finds that the stain is in a place where it's a problem, beneath the stomach area. However, she has a wound, an injury on the shoulder. We don't say, no, it came from there, right? Unless the injury is close by, close enough that we can say it's possibly from there. Otherwise, we don't consider it. Yes. Okay, what you're saying is that many times women can tell where it came from. That's okay. That's okay. However, remember, we're not being as strict with ketanim as we are with the regular blood. Therefore, we need to have all these options available, because this applies even if she has a feeling it came from there. Remember, if it does not have the right size, then even if she has a feeling that's where it came from, it would be clean. The Chachamim were mekel. Even if she has a feeling, that's where it comes from. Most likely it came from it's okay. It's not the size, it's not the color, or the beged was not baduk. Because this could be an old stain. Even if it's therefore big, it's a big stain, it's more than a grease. It will be an unclean stain if everything else was okay. However, it's not a beged baduk. We're lenient with her. You see, there's a lot of leniencies over here. If any one of these could apply, then this may not be a keten tameh. And one of the last points, yesh bameh litlot. As I've been saying all along, that if a woman can determine that this blood is from somewhere else, she was washing chickens, cleaning the fish, she was passing by a butcher store, and the guy was chopping away, and it went on her, right? Or she was next to her children. Her children had some cut, or she had a cut on it, right? All of this needs to be determined. Or it could be a liquid, or it could be a makeup. That happens a lot. The women sometimes make the mistake, even though you were saying that many women know, sometimes they make mistakes and say, oh no, this looks pinkish, reddish, and it could be makeup, believe it or not. That can happen too, and I've heard about it. So that is when you want to take a close look at it, in good lighting, see what it is, where it comes from. If you don't know, you need to ask. So if a woman is able to attribute that this keten came from a place other than from herself, then she doesn't have that problem, right? In order for a keten, for a stain to be a tameh, unclean, all of these criteria have to. So now let's go to another issue, which is somewhat related to this, but it's not so much a keten. It's much more a problem with blood. And that is something called an ed baduk or ed sheino baduk. If a woman checks herself, so she's already checking herself with something, but she did not take a look at it right away. She put it away, right? And later on, she discovers, oh, there's some blood on it. But she also sees a bug on it. Now you might say, well, we just learned that if you attribute it to a bug, then maybe, that's where it came from. No. If the ed was baduk, if you checked the ed before you checked it was a clean ed, a clean cloth. The woman checks herself with it, even though she put it away. As long as she put it away in a safe place, where it did not get into contact with anything else, even if she sees a bug in it, it's red, bloody, she's unclean. And she's unclean regardless of the size, because she checked herself. That's a situation where you don't attribute, because she checked herself with it. However, you still have to consider the two considerations. Before the woman checks herself, what she took with her, was it clean or unclean? And after she put it away, did she put it in a place which is safe or unsafe? Because if it's an unsafe place, we might be able to be lenient. It's not such a big, or if she didn't check it before well. But if it's a big stain, then because she checked herself, we're mahmir. These are issues that apply to what we call an ed. An ed is the cloth, or whatever you check yourself. You want to make sure it's clean before. You want to make sure you check it immediately after, so you don't run in this safek doubt. Wait a minute, did it really come from that? Or maybe what I was checking was already dirty. Or maybe when I put it away and I didn't check it immediately, it got in contact with something. So we're stricter with it because this is an internal exam. But depending on the situation, there might be one or two lenient. And the last item that I want to talk about is one of the most important halachot of tamim. And that is, discuss the fact that the color is important, the size is important, where you find it. And where you find it, I only discussed 2 out of the 3 possibilities. And that is, davar she'eno mekabel tumah, if it's something that does not become clean, that makes life easy. Makom HaKeten is also important as to what part of the body is found. If it's on the body itself, which is a little bit more serious than if it's on a garment. And if it's on a garment, where on the garment it is. If it's in a place where it could have come from there, then it could be a problem. It's the right size and the right color and so forth. If it's in a place where it most likely did not come, then we're not concerned. There's one more important point which one needs to consider when one finds a keten. Anybody know what it is that I left out? No. One of the most important things in Ilchot Ktamim, in the Halachot of Ktamim, that one has to be aware of. Where you find it, you found the keten colored, not on a white garment. All of what I've just said, except for the body itself on the body, applies if it was crystal clear to you that this is red. How do you know if it's red? Depending on the background. If the background is not white, forget about it. It's not an issue. Unless, of course, you check her. That's already a different story. You have to check yourself with clean garments, with a white garment, so you can tell. But if you're sitting somewhere, all of a sudden you see blood, regardless of the size, regardless where you found it, it's a keten, even if it appears red, the background is not white, we're lenient with ketamim, including finding a ketem which appears to be a big one. But because it was found on a colored garment, the rabbis would. So guess what? As a result of this halakha, women are advised to wear colored undergarments, except the 7 days. Except for the 7 days when you want to be. One does this, then he has less problems, less issues to contend with finding a stain if the background is colored. There could still be a stain from time to time because there are parts of undergarments that are white. It may be colored, but it may be not completely colored. Maybe parts are white and parts are colored. It just happens to be that it fell, a stain on the part that was white. It could be a stain on some other garment, on a robe, on part of the robe with a clear background that would render her perhaps teme'ah, if it was the right side. So that is one of the best advice that one can give for the women who, especially those who have trouble, who have a lot of spotting, as they say. That is the best thing. They should have the color undergarment, because if they spot a lot, the husband will be very, very unhappy. Now, there are times that one needs to check, and we'll talk about that when we speak about the various cycles, the Vesatot. We spoke a little bit about it when we discussed Hefsek Tahara, that a woman checks her. During the times that she needs to check her, she of course needs a white garment, what's there, see what the color is. Because remember, if she has a Hargasha, even if she has and she checked herself right away and she saw that the color was a clean color, she doesn't have to worry about it. The problem is when you don't check late, after the Hargasha, she's teme'ah. So it's important to do things immediately, to check things out immediately, besides the fact that if it's something fresh, you don't want it to dry out, but then you're not able to the right color, and colors do change. So you want to give it an immediate attempt to discover it, and go through this process. You don't have to go through all of this. You can ask a rabbi too, unless it's very clear to you. And there are some cases that are crystal clear, small, and it didn't come about through checking. It's a very small speck. Even if it's red, because of the size, you immediately disqualify it. The problem begins red, it's big, and when it's an area, that might be a problem. It's not on the body or on the garment. And you ask yourself, where did this come from? Then you have to go through this and say, perhaps this is from somewhere else. For example, let's say she was making prune juice. The prune juice could have squirted on top of her body, even on the body. She knows that's what she did a few minutes before. It could be that. Now, I agree with what you said before, that many, many times you'll be able to figure it out, right? This is either prune juice or this is their blood, right? But sometimes there's a doubt, and that happens usually when time has elapsed, and you're not able to tell, where this came from. And the color is very similar. That is when you have to go through. All right, I think we've covered the basic halachot of ketamim. I did not want to lump this together with the vesatot, or periods, because each one really is complex, and there are quite a few details in the halachot, so I split them in two. And the next time is on the vesatot, the differences with the various cycles, how a woman can establish and know what cycle she has and what she has to contend with on a monthly basis. This is important for the husband because he needs to know which days to be apart from his wife. That B'ezrat Hashem will cover. Good question. If a woman is pregnant, we discussed this during the time when we discussed the halachot of pregnancy women, she still may stain. You need to consider this issue as well. Because a stain can be at all times, or cannot be. In other words, depending on where it is found, on the size and the color, if you can attribute it to something else. The rabbis were lenient with stain. They basically said that it does not mean all this. But the biggest savor of all, the colored, because then you can't recognize for sure if the stain is a true red or not. Yes? Why? I started out with the pasuk of the Torah that only zav, dam yazuv, only blood flows. If there's a hargasha, that's tumah midoraita. The stains are not coming with the hargasha. If there was a hargasha, of course, and then you see a stain, then of course that's tameh, because you attribute it to that. Following? But we're talking about just a regular situation where you see it and there was no hargasha. Now, perhaps I should just add one more point, or this will finish. We may discuss it a little bit more next week, 2 weeks from now. I briefly mentioned it, I think, in the past, and that is, there is one woman there are two types of women who have bad luck. One who stains a lot, of course, very regular cycles. It's very difficult for her to become. Another woman sees blood, she's with her husband. That's when that could become a problem, because a woman would have to divorce her husband. If it's been determined after several times, she always sees blood after they're together. Well, they're together, guess what? And that could happen. So, if a woman were to see a stain, not blood, stain, after being with her husband, he should treat that stain as checking herself. Because that is that is most likely as a result of the intimate relationship. You cannot no longer say, well, maybe it's something else, maybe from that, right? That's already in the category of checking yourself, which means what? We don't pay attention to the signs. And even a speck, as long as it's red, we say that this is from there. That's not anymore a keten. Not all the leniencies applying. Right. Very good. I was going to say that if it's a medical problem that can be, then of course you should look into that because it's a big problem. He has a lot of stains. What I didn't discuss is what happens with women who stain as a result of taking pills, various types of, especially pills that are for not hormones to delay the period. What are they called? What is that? Birth control pills. We're going to be talking about birth control also in about 3-4 weeks actually after we discuss Tevilah. After this, I thought we'll be discussing the Ilchot of Tevilah and Chafitza, which is another very important area for women, on how she goes about immersing herself in the water and the various things to do prior to going to the mikveh. That's a very important area. It takes a little while. And after that, we'll talk about the birth control issue, how to go about that, when the rabbis allowed it, and what the Ilchot Tzniut that I meant. Okay, I think that's it for now. Yeah, right. And then what? There's blood there. Yeah. If it's okay, if they actually found that if she got the period during the time that they were together and it was bishgaga, it was accidental, then there's no karet. But they still require a kapara. They still need a tshuva for it. And maybe if we have time, I'll discuss with you what they do, both husband and wife, but especially the man. If he discovers that she's unclean at that moment. Remind me, we'll discuss that towards the end. Okay.